Picture this. It's 1989. You're 11 years old. It's a Friday night, and your parents are watching the news, something about a wall coming down somewhere in Europe, and you don't fully understand it, but you sense that the adults in the room feel like something just shifted. You go back to your room, you've got a cassette tape in your Walkman, a library book on the floor, and absolutely no way to tell anyone what you're thinking right now, except to maybe write it in a journal that you'll probably throw away. The world outside is changing in real time, and you're in your bedroom, alone, processing all of it in silence. Psychologists who study generational identity have started paying close attention to people who grew up in that exact window, roughly born between 1977 and 1985. Not quite Generation X, not quite millennials, something else entirely. And what they're finding is that this group doesn't just feel caught between two generations. They feel caught between two entirely different versions of what it means to be a person. The term Xennial was coined almost casually, a portmanteau that got picked up and passed around online. But underneath the label is something genuinely interesting. Because this isn't just about what music you listen to or whether you had a Nokia 3310. It's about the specific psychological architecture that forms when a child grows up in an analog world, and then, right in the middle of their identity formation, the entire information landscape flips. You learned how to be a person without the internet. And then the internet arrived, and you had to learn how to be a person again. Developmental psychologists call the adolescent and early adult years the identity consolidation period. It's the window when your sense of self, your values, your social patterns, your relationship to ambiguity gets hardwired in ways that are genuinely hard to rewire later. And Xennials went through that consolidation period during one of the most dramatic cultural pivots in recorded history. They built their inner world in one era, then had to navigate adulthood in a completely different one. That's not nostalgia. That's a structural psychological condition. Here's what it looks like in practice. You're comfortable with silence in a way that younger colleagues find slightly unnerving. You remember what it felt like to be genuinely unreachable, and part of you misses it. You can exist without your phone for a few hours and feel okay. But you also check your email compulsively and understand memes and have parasocial relationships with podcasters. You're fluent in both worlds. And somehow, that fluency makes you feel like you fully belong to neither. A 2015 study published in the journal Emerging Adulthood found that individuals who underwent major technological transitions during adolescence, what researchers called high-contingency environments, showed measurably higher rates of what they called identity ambivalence. Not identity confusion, which implies chaos. Ambivalence, holding two coherent but contradictory self-concepts simultaneously with no clear resolution. The study followed respondents into their 30s and found the pattern didn't diminish with age. It just became more practiced. You got very good at holding two things at once. And here's the contradiction nobody really talks about. Xennials are simultaneously the most self-sufficient people you'll ever meet, and some of the most quietly, privately exhausted, because self-sufficiency isn't just a personality trait for this group. It's a survival mechanism that got built before they had the vocabulary to question it. You figured things out alone. You looked things up in actual books, or you just didn't find out. You navigated social pain without a phone in your pocket to escape into. You developed a kind of interior life that's dense and rich and largely invisible to other people. But that interiority has a cost. There's a specific type of loneliness that comes from being highly capable. When you've always managed, people stop asking if you're okay. When you've always figured it out, no one thinks to offer help. And after a while, you stop expecting it. Not bitterly, just practically. A 2019 report from the American Psychological Association noted that adults in the 35 to 45 age bracket reported the lowest rates of help-seeking behavior of any adult cohort. Not because they had fewer problems, but because asking for support had come to feel, somehow, like evidence of a failure they hadn't committed yet. Let that sit for a second. Now, and this matters, there are actually 3 distinct patterns within this group, and it's worth asking which one you recognize in yourself. The first type fully migrated. They embraced digital identity early, built their professional and social lives around platforms and networks, and now occasionally feel a ghost limb sensation for a slower world they can barely remember. They're online, effective, maybe even influential, but there's a low hum of something they can't name, like they left something in that childhood bedroom and can't remember what it was. The second type is straddling, one foot in each world permanently. They work in tech, but keep a paper notebook. They have 2,000 Instagram followers and also a group of friends they've known since before camera phones existed. They're the person at the dinner party who can talk to anyone, the 24-year-old and the 60-year-old, because they're fluent in both registers. This is a genuinely rare skill. It also means you never feel completely at home anywhere. The third type quietly opted out, not dramatically. No manifesto, no digital detox retreat. They just slowly, methodically reduced their exposure to the noise and built something smaller and more deliberate. They're often the ones people describe as grounded without quite being able to say why. What they're actually doing is honoring the operating system they were built on. Which one are you? There's an evolutionary frame worth considering here. Humans are extraordinarily sensitive to cultural belonging. It's wired deep because for most of our history, being outside the group meant genuine physical danger. The need to belong isn't soft or sentimental. It's neurological. And what Xennials experienced was a kind of belonging disruption, not rejection, but something subtler, a generational boundary that kept shifting. Too young to be taken seriously by Gen X, too old to be fully legible to millennials, present at the founding of the internet, but not born into it. The psychological result is a person who is perpetually calibrating, always reading the room, always translating, always slightly aware of the gap between who they are and who the moment seems to require them to be. That calibration is exhausting, and it's also quietly a form of genius, because the capacity to hold contradictions, to be analog and digital, independent and connected, nostalgic and forward-facing, is actually one of the most sophisticated cognitive skills a person can have. The psychologist Philip Tetlock spent years studying forecasters and found that the most accurate predictors weren't experts in a single domain. They were people who could hold multiple frameworks simultaneously and update their thinking fluidly. He called them foxes rather than hedgehogs. Xennials, by structural necessity, became foxes. But here's the uncomfortable question, and I want you to actually sit with it rather than immediately answer it. How much of your adaptability is a genuine strength? And how much of it is a way of never fully committing to any identity so that you can never fully be rejected by one? There's a difference between being fluent in many worlds and using that fluency as a kind of permanent exit strategy, between being adaptable and being unavailable for belonging, between holding contradictions and using complexity as armor. I'm not saying it's one or the other. I'm saying it might be worth knowing which it is. The people who grew up in that window between the last truly offline childhood and the first fully digital adolescence carry something that's genuinely difficult to explain to anyone who didn't live it. It's not trauma. It's more like a particular kind of frequency, a tuning that happened during a very specific moment in history and can't be replicated. They remember what quiet actually felt like. They know what it cost to wait. They built their inner lives in the dark before the world lit everything up. and they've been translating ever since. Between generations, between eras, between versions of themselves that never quite merged. Always the bridge, rarely the destination. So I'm curious, which of those three patterns do you recognize in yourself? The one who migrated, the one who's still straddling, or the one who quietly stepped back? Leave it in the comments. These threads tend to turn into the most interesting conversations on this channel. And if this kind of psychology, the kind that actually tries to explain you rather than just describe behavior, if that's something you want more of, subscribing means you won't miss what's coming next.